everybody, and welcome to Deep Thoughts with Bill. So, I gotta say, I hate quotes. I want to put it to you, when we're discussing something or having an intelligent debate about something, personally, I really hate it when someone starts quoting somebody to me. Now, people have come up to me and said, that's a really silly opinion to have, Bill. Why'd you say that? Well, let me put it to you this way. This doesn't happen all the time, but a lot of times there's an element of have your own thoughts and words. Don't be a zombie blindly parroting something that somebody else has said. There's too many people that I've come across that they surrender their God-given critical, objective thinking skills to just adopt somebody else's opinion as true. And I think people need to be a little more individualistic and think about things and decide for themselves what they believe rather than simply adopting somebody else's thoughts automatically without really thinking about it. So that's definitely an element. Number two, the way it's used sometimes, in my experience, it's been used kind of like an attack tool, because the author of the quote is usually somebody famous or accomplished or noted in some sense, So if you are seen to challenge their thought, their quote, you look a fool to question them. There's an element of that. People think that they can shut you down by saying, this famous person agrees with me, so therefore you're clearly wrong. So I just think it's a very cheap tactic to try and do that. The third element that I would say about this is that, a lot of people who use a quote from a famous person in a discussion, most often they're taking the quote out of context. Most quotes are like a sentence or maybe 2 or 3 sentences, something like that. But usually the original thing that they're quoting, the original statement, it wasn't made in isolation. It was made in a larger context of some kind. And so when you're quoting them, more often than not, you're taking that original quote completely out of its original context, and you can use it. If you're going to do that, you can use it to prove whatever you want, right? So I find that's kind of a very cheap kind of tactic. Just because somebody said it doesn't mean that it's universally true in every context, right? That's why it's of little use when you're trying to discuss something intelligently. And finally, I would say the other reason I don't like quotes is because just because, something is a quote doesn't mean necessarily that it's valid, right? I mean, I could quote The Village Idiot. I could quote Charles Manson. I could quote somebody who doesn't know what they're talking about, but that doesn't back up my argument and demonstrate that it's true, right? It gives the illusion that you have weight behind your argument when you really don't. And I'll even go as far as to kind of tie it to this weird concept, if you can understand this. A few years ago, before recent events, one of the issues being debated was building statues to people. Just hear me out here. In the past, they would build statues to people who did great things, okay? And in more modern times, the trend is to tear down statues because although this person that we built a statue to, although they did this great thing, they're not perfect. And they may have done or thought or said something that doesn't really fit in with what we think is something that should be celebrated today. So because that person was not perfect, even though they did this one thing, we're going to tear down their statue. Now, coming back to the quote thing, when somebody uses a quote in an argument, to me, it really seems like the quote is the opposite of that, okay? The quote is assumed to be true, but even though the author may have failed at things in their life or have been wrong many times in their life, we're just going to ignore that. We're just going to assume that the quote is true. So, for example, I could quote Steve Jobs to back up a business decision. I would say, Steve Jobs said this, therefore it must be true. Now, as a lot of people know, Steve Jobs was right, and he was very smart, and he got quite a few things right and got some big wins. Great. Also, arguably, he got quite a few big things wrong. He failed at a lot of other things, and he failed at other things in his life that suggests that he wasn't this all-knowing, all-seeing genius that was right all the time. But when someone quotes Steve Jobs, the assumption is that the quote is true. So that's what I don't like about it. There's these elements in there. So when I'm having a debate or a discussion or anything intelligently, I prefer it when people don't just blindly quote some famous person that may or may not be true, and it may or may not be in context. And I find it unhelpful. So I don't know if you agree with that. I'm probably in the minority here, but let me know what you think in the comments, if that makes sense or that just sounds like a bunch of crap. Let me know. You guys are awesome. I'll see you on the next one. Take care.